Hello, everyone, and greetings from our studio here in the Slash headquarters. We have the true Finnish November weather outside our windows, but I hope you're joining from the comfort of your homes and are ready for an exciting 45 minutes ahead of us. I'm Eva, the head of program at Slash, and I am excited to open this session, actually one of our last sessions during this fall, with Jonas Nordlander, the co-founder of Avito, and Sonali the Rycker, the partner at Accel. And what a great session it's going to be, diving deep into the leadership learnings from Avito's journey from building and scaling the second biggest class field site in the world. Throughout the next 45 minutes, please remember to leave your questions in the Q&A box right below your screen. The session is also live streamed on YouTube, and we will be live tweeting the best insights from our audience. So remember to tweet with the hashtag #NodeBySlash. Now on to Sonali the Rycker. Sonali joined Accel in 2008, and she invests in consumer internet, software, and fintech businesses. Sonali led Accel's investments into Avito, Spotify, Monzo, Crew, Hopin, and so many other great businesses. Now, that's enough from me. Sonali, the floor is yours, and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm really thrilled to be joined here with Jonas, co-founder of Avito. Now, I realize that some of you may not know that much about Avito, so I thought I'd just give you a couple of minutes of background. Avito happens to be one of Europe's largest internet companies. Jonas and his co-founder built Avito into Russia's dominant online classified business, as Eva mentioned, and marketplace business, and really the second largest classified in the world and a real pioneer in the classified space. If you're Russian, Avito is really how you buy and sell houses, how you find a job, how you buy and sell literally everything you need for your house or under the sun for businesses too. And it really has become a verb and a cultural phenomena in Russia. To give you a sense of numbers, it's not here why we're here today, but I think it's helpful just to give you context. It has more than 50 million monthly active users, and they're really active, even though it operates in the largest landmass in the world, in Russia. It has 95% brand awareness over hundreds of cities, big and small cities, still growing over 30%. And I think what's pretty unbelievable and really something that people don't know much about is that it has hundreds of millions of dollars of profit. We don't talk that much about profit in the venture capital world, but it's remarkable when it actually happens. I think if the company was public today, and don't quote me, it's just my view. This is a business that would be very similar to the story of Allegro, which is a Polish online marketplace business, which trades north of 15 billion euros today. But as I said, we're here to really talk about the personal side of Avito, which I think, having been on the ground at Accel for more than 20 years, I think is really one of the finest stories of leadership and grit and courage. And so I'm totally thrilled that Jonas decided to join us today. He doesn't normally accept these invitations, so it's a little bit of persuasion, but it's a real treat to have him here and to tell the sort of bottoms-up story of what I think is a very against the odds story of him and Philip building this giant marketplace business. So thanks again, Jonas, and I look forward to unpacking some of those incredibly valuable insights and lessons.
Let's do it.
So let's do it. So listen, the first question for me is really around the founding story. It's a topic that I think people almost don't talk about enough, is how important that founding team, the founding setup is to the path, but also to kind of the shape and the ultimate outcome of the story. With Avito, Philip came in almost a bit later, but it was an exceptionally successful co-founding story because he became a co-founder in every respect, and you're incredibly close today, which hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about. Your previous business, Trudera, that you sold to eBay successfully a long time ago, you started with one setup in terms of people, you ended up with a very different setup. Talk to us a bit about what strong founding teams mean for you.
So I think now also being sort of a amateur investor, but I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, I think there's over 30 companies in our small portfolio. I mean, we see a lot of different founding stories, and I think that sort of really resonates with the way I've seen my own sort of founding stories over a number of businesses that I've been part of running and starting. And Trudera, I think that was that's one example where you have me being invited by a friend who I'm actually working for his family, and they run a traditional auction house in Stockholm, and they have an idea of bringing that online, and asked me if I wanted to join and starting that company. But this is in this founder constellation, you have an idea that comes from a family that's actually also sort of doing the seed investment into this, since I was a poor student, and you don't really have that much say in the beginning on sort of what business model should look like, because they have a very strong idea of what they want to do and what they want to achieve, also driven by parents and siblings. And here, when you look at this is back in 1999, when you look at sort of the VC market, very immature, and since this is a bit about leadership, I think this is really where sort of some bad leadership comes into play, where you're not able to, as a venture capitalist, to sort of rethink and ask the right questions. You're sort of so much into these are the guys doing this, and this is what they've said they're going to do, and you can't really sort of go outside of that set box. And I think that was the case for the guy I started the company with as well. And we brought in some other people a few months into this, and I think that was a terrible mistake, which ended up in sort of a complete disaster after a year. So he left the company, and I was left with us having just bought the two other companies doing the similar thing in Sweden. And it was a classic sort of trade swap where you had two dead dogs and traded against a dead cat. So the only thing that we actually kept from that original company was the name and organizational number. So then you can ask sort of who is the founder. And the way I look at this is the guys that came from these other companies that I managed to talk into sort of doing this together. And these were only 5 guys. And I think we were 60, 70 when we sort of had to kill every employee. Which is, obviously a tough call, but that's also sort of a leadership call, and then agree with the venture capitalists that, keep spoon feeding us, like they call it, which is basically a very simple way of diluting the hell out of the entrepreneurs. But in this small team, we had, people who were not the actual founders of these respectively businesses where they came from, but at the end of the day, we changed the business model. The only thing that we have kept from the original company was the name and the number. Everything else, there's not a single line of code. There's nothing left. It's all of their grit, all of their ideas. And I think my role in that was that I realized that I had a good way of managing different types of personalities and getting people around sort of to come around a new idea and a new concept of doing things. And that really became Trudera, which was the company we sold 6 years later to eBay.
So very, very different setup. And then maybe we'll fast forward. Thank you for that, Jonas. Let's fast forward to Avito. And let's talk about sort of how difficult that was in the early days and how you kept going. I mean, I remember I heard this when I was on the ground in Moscow in those early days. You came to start this consumer business, this classifieds business, this marketplace business, and it changed its form as many businesses do, from scratch in a country where, did you speak the language at the time?
No, I don't speak Russian.
You don't speak, yeah. So exactly. So a domestic business, and let's accept Russia. We know it. I know it. It's a special place full of incredibly special people, but it's also another level of execution risk, of political risk, of financial risk. And I remember when I used to visit Moscow, because we all took the market very seriously. It was it is the largest market in Europe. That these two Swedes who sort of started this thing up, and there's no way you were going to be successful. Tell us a little bit about what kept you going in those early days, because there was everybody who believed it was never going to work.
No, I think, yeah, sort of no one believed. I think Per Brilliot, who was one of the shareholders in Trudera that worked with me for 7 years in that company, he believed in me and a couple of these guys that sort of were were the founders of Trudera that came to Moscow with me. I think they were not able to move. They didn't want to move. They thought Russia was scary. And at that time, Philip was not working in the business. We had exactly like with Trudera, we had a different business idea than what actually sort of panned out to work in Russia. And this was sort of so before you came into this, we were sort of the four of us, these guys popping in and out. I was on the ground by myself, had a Russian guy that I met when I was working with Trudera, called him up and asked him if he could come. He moved from Germany back to Russia to work with me, which was, invaluable since I didn't speak Russian, and it's quite hard. It's a tough place. But Philip was sort of in the same group of companies, and he was running a different business with the same investors. But after a year, I think that's when I realized that these guys who are my friends and who I'd worked with, for years in Trudera, that were really sort of an integral part of our success there, that would not work. And then I sat down with them and had, that sort of difficult discussion, saying that this guy's is not going to work out. But I want to keep doing this, but I think we need to go separate ways. But I still want to, be your friends, which we still are. But and I think having a very honest discussion around these topics, they agreed that this is not a good idea for them to be. I mean, they were holding me back, and at that time I got to know Philip, since we were in this sort of same group of companies, and really liked him, and he really complimented me in many ways. So we just said, let's do it. Let's give it a serious try, and sort of remake the model that we came into Russia with, into a sort of more pure play classified model. Since I came from an auction background, there was some auction stuff in the initial model that we brought to Russia. And that's where it started. And I think if we would talk to the guys that I work with in Trudera, they agree that he is really the co-founder of the company, and obviously they came over to Russia for a little while, but they were not part of us. Like they were part of building Trudera. They were not really part of building this. So that, I think this is something that when I look at a lot of the businesses that we have invested into, it's a story that pops up all the time. There's always some confusion around who actually is the founder and who did what. But at the end of the day, it's I think the people who were on the ground for years and years, and sort of battling through and being able to sort of rethink and remodel what you started with, because it's very seldom you actually end up with what you start with.
But incredible that you were able to have those transparent discussions, and we'll come to culture later, but it's very often we see where people don't want to have those tough discussions, or they delay it too late, and the entire journey ends up being on one path versus the path that it could have been on, the could have, should have. But we'll talk more about culture. I want to just also talk about risk, because we're all in the business of risk, the entrepreneurs even more than us, but we're here for risk and hopefully uncapped reward in some sense. And one of the characteristics that I think a lot about when we back companies, I know you do, and I think really describes you and Philip from when I got to know you earlier in the journey, was really around being bold. You were very bold in terms of how, by being there, firstly, we've discussed that, but you also were very bold in terms of how you built the company. You pioneered the playbook of classifieds marketing, blast marketing, TV spending, really great kind of gain market share, which was pretty unusual anywhere, but definitely in Russia. But I would say that even staying the course, Jonas, in Russia required you to be bold, because at the point at which you won and you became successful, you were really a cultural phenomena, as I said in my introduction, and you were on the radar as a result in Russia, right? And we all know being on the radar has very significant consequences and implications in terms of the Russian ecosystem, the Russian politics. I remember when we had a very sophisticated denial of service attack, and there was a lot of other elements to that. So there was some very significant risk embodied in everything you guys did at Avito in Russia. Talk to the group about how you think about risk, and when is some risk too much risk, and at some point you need to recalibrate the risk you're willing to take as the organization grows up, because that's so core to how entrepreneurs build large businesses.
Yeah, but yeah, I think so. I mean, if I talk to sort of most of my friends and family, obviously we have a different view of how to measure risk, and I'm I like risk, I'm not afraid of risk, and I think going to Russia, at the end of the day, there's so much myths about Russia, and a lot is true, which is unfortunate, but underneath this sort of mythical sort of military police state, you just have an enormous amount of fantastic people with educations from great universities in Russia and outside, around the world, and these are people who didn't grow up in sort of the Russia that we think of in sort of the movies Russia, sort of the Soviet Union. And this, when you come to realize that obviously there's always a part of the culture that's sort of the old Soviet, where you have people who don't, they don't necessarily want you to end up in a good place. It's also a lot of bark, and if you're not afraid of barking, if you can sort of handle barking and focus on sort of what's actually good and what's the opportunity. I mean, Russia was, it's an amazing opportunity. I mean, we came into a country with less than 30% internet penetration, but, was growing double digit. It was just amazing. You had a middle class that was growing, normal families with normal jobs, with kids and dogs and summer houses. And, and you had access to, after a while, at least when Russia sort of went into a bit of a recession, then, so people sort of calmed down. We could get access to people who were really, really talented. I mean, sort of, they could be anywhere in the world and deliver. And this was our focus. Obviously, there were some parts of what happened that were sort of, scary. And I think some of the goal for some people were to make us go back to Sweden. But I think here again, being with the person that I became very, very close friends with, and who I now call my best friend, we sort of saw it as a challenge. And I think you know this. And instead of deterring us from keep pushing, it just made us more determined to prove to everyone that you could make it. Because at the same time, we saw the numbers. And the numbers told us, we're actually onto something really, really, really big. And this is something that's so difficult to create in a more sort of modern, or, a society where things are a bit ahead, So here we could go in, and you had all the competition, but they were just not thinking in a modern way. And that was really sort of our edge. So, in many, many ways, it was much simpler than doing this in the UK or in Germany. These are really tough markets, but
sure. More virgin territory, but a lot more complicated. There's some great questions on the chat, so I'm going to pick out a couple, and it's a good way to segue to the broader topic of leadership and culture. And there's one particular question around, and thank you guys for sending the question, is how important were the first. There's a few questions around hiring and leadership traits. And I'm going to just merge 2 or 3 questions, if that's okay. This is to the audience, so bear with me, and I hope I don't sort of mess it up. But there's a question around how do you select your first 10 employees? And I know how much you care about this, Jonas, so I think it's a great way to talk about culture and leadership. And there's a question of, are there any specific requirements on skills or emotional intellect And then there's another question about, do you care more about IQ or EQ? Just wrap that all together in terms of those critical hires and what you look for, because I know that defines.
I mean, my background being sort of, I mean, the reason why I have succeeded is not because I'm brilliant. I'm pretty good at finding people who are sort of sometimes on the paper outside of the box, but if in the right context, they work really, really well together and they can create some amazing stuff. And in Russia, coming in when there's, Russia was booming when we came in, and every talent were either starting their own company or were working in one of the sort of established companies. So I got, sort of the worst of the worst. That was sort of what I accessed. And that was, a bit tough in the beginning. But in 2008, there was a recession starting, 2009. And I had met a lot of people. And I sort of talked to these guys that I had met that were at that time in sort of their own businesses, but were now sort of looking for work. And there is a big difference between Sweden and Russia in terms of trust. So, I mean, in Sweden, people trust, and I believe trust is a super, super important part of leadership, that you get people to trust you and that you deliver on promises. And here I came to a country where every single person at some point been tricked by their employer or someone else. So there's sort of so much distrust. So that was really a challenge to explain that, this is the way I work, this is my background, this is this is what I expect from you, and the whole thing of being able to sort of, as an employee, to be responsible for an area by yourself without having someone looking over your shoulder. That was very, very new to the guys that I started working with at that point. So. And there was just some work, and then it's time. After some time, people realized that this guy or these guys with Philip, even though I was sort of the maybe the people person guy running that part, they saw that we were for real, and we shared information, and we trusted them, so they could trust us. And this is something that's it's so easy, and it comes so natural to me, and it was so unnatural to a lot of these guys, but with time, and this spread really quickly. So when they saw that this was actually true, and they started to talk to their friends and say, hey guys, these guys they're for real. And when there's problems with banks being closed because we were attacked by someone who closed our bank accounts, we went around and we got the money from our private cash accounts and paid them cash. Just, we lent people money when there's we just did everything to execute on what we promised, which was, you're going to get your salary. If we promise you a bonus, you're going to get this. You're going to get, if this is your responsibility, we're going to trust you to do it, and we'll follow up together. All of these small things added up to something that was completely different to most companies in Russia. And I think we were extremely rewarded over time for keeping that sort of culture.
Yeah, not just companies in Russia, right? It's not just a Russian comparison. You really built your own culture. And one of the things that I can never quite forget is when I walked into that new office of yours, and you said, hey, look at the kitchen. This is where we have our mission statement on the kitchen, in the kitchen. And I went in, and in big spray paint on the wall. And sorry for the language, but this is the truth, was painted, don't fuck it up. And I thought to myself, that's the mission statement, but it really worked. But what did you mean by don't fuck it up? What does that actually mean in terms of how did people read that at Avito?
Yeah, and I think this is also something that we said this so many times, me and Philip. So when we actually, I think that the stuff that you saw on the wall, that was actually the employees that sort of, they'd done those paintings on an offsite that we had when we celebrated the first quarter of being profitable, I think in 2012. And no, but it was just, it's so easy to stray off sort of the sort of the path of success that we were on, as soon as you start to grow and you start to get money, and as soon as you have money, you're also you're in a position where you can tell people like yourself to go and yourself if you'd like to, because you're sort of, you control the cash. And here we said, let's not just go around and start new things that we can't control. Let's not change the way we recruit people. And there's a question about IQ and EQ. I mean, we tested every senior. I mean, I was part of employing people up to probably a couple of hundred people. I was still part of every interview. We tested EQ and IQ, but it was also a lot of personal interviews. And if it was a senior person, I mean, and I think this, I mean, we spent a ridiculous amount of time in private meetings, private dinners, drinking beer to see what happens when you get something inside the system, and really digging into who this person is, because it's such an important relationship that you enter into from both sides, since you're giving up so much of your free time from your family and stuff to join us, and we are investing so much into it. So it's and I think all of these investments and all of these quirky things that we did really made us a better team and a better company, because we had to focus less on handling miscommunication and teams that didn't work and people who didn't work. And when we had people who didn't work, we also were very quick with sort of sitting down and being completely transparent and saying, like, this is if it's a person that we worked with that we loved, that worked for a long time and had delivered great, but could not take the next step, we had a super open discussion around that, that we cannot help you take that next step, and it's probably better for you, for your career, and we will always support you to sort of try something new. And if that works out, you're always welcome back. But at this point, it's just going to hamper your ability to grow, to be with Avito. And also with people who did not deliver, just tell them, this just doesn't work. You're not doing what we expect you to do. And these, in some cases, these were people who were highly intelligent and hardworking, but they did not give 110%, because they felt that they only had to do 80% to be as good as someone else. And this was not accepted in the way we ran the company.
Which is an important insight, and it's worth putting a spotlight on it. For you, it wasn't just the what you delivered; it was also about the effort.
Yep.
And and how much of the soul you put into it, which is what other people see in terms of people's peer group. So it's worth teasing that out. I'm gonna move to sort of a topic around focus, and there's such great questions here. But there's a question around, how do you stay focused? It was also one of my questions to you, so we'll merge those together. One thing I've noticed as an investor in the current market, I think you probably notice it too, because you are investing today, is the allure of shiny new things. Capital has never been cheaper. There's just so much opportunity in terms of what people can do. I see it as less and less common now for entrepreneurs to say no, which is, they do want to build a new product. They want to get into the new market. They want to expand into a new adjacency. So it's really, people are trying to do a lot as opposed to focus, which is what it used to be the real mantra in, why do startups win? Because they're focused. When you were building Avito, you had every opportunity thrown at you, right? Because you were the marketplace in this large country, JVs, new verticals, new ideas, new geographies to take your expertise. At some point, you moved to Morocco to start the Middle East business. What was your learning on how important is focus? And when do you kill something? When do you really double down?
Yeah, no, I think, and that's sort of really a key question in company building, I think. And we see this in some of the companies that we invested into today, that they are, when capital is easy to access and it's, there's a lot of ideas, you tend to start new things before you really sort of landed in your core business. And we were actually pretty good at staying on course. We talked about sort of this highway that we were on, and we could make the highway wider, or we could put more cars on the highway, but we would stay true to what we do. and obviously staying true to what we did was adding more verticals. If you sell dogs, you can sell cars, etc. But adding on, when you start to add talent onto a team and you start to hire people who are extremely smart and extremely driven, and we had a lot of funds coming in. I mean, it was just pure cash coming in into the business. So we had all these opportunities. There obviously was a lot of ideas and a lot of push to do new things. And at some point, I mean, me and Philip, we agreed that we should do something outside of Russia, and we looked at the MENA region, and I even moved there and I to go back and forth between Morocco and Cairo and Moscow for 2 years almost. And this sort of, in hindsight, this was on paper a great deal. We sold this to Schibsted, sort of in the context of a European online business. This was a fantastic deal. But when we looked at it from how much resources and how much dilution of time this was for the business, it was a bad decision. I think we should have added probably a couple of $100 million more in value if we would have put those resources into Russia and to the sort of core business, instead of adding a few tens of millions of dollars in profit doing Africa. And this goes for a lot of things that we looked at, and sometimes we just could not sort of hold back, and we started ventures that we just knew this would not work, and then we were also proven wrong a few times, which is great. So there's a few of these projects that are still live and kicking and now delivering really well. So I mean, it's you get a bit humble after some time to sort of how much can you focus and when is it time to start something new. But to make it very simple, I mean, we're still on the entrepreneurs that we invest into, we're still super on them, on staying focused and not starting to stray away too early, because it takes time to build sort of the core of your business.
And I remember very well those very engaged board conversations. And I mean, just I want to also sort of ask this question for the benefit of the audience, because of the current climate where everyone's raising money all the time and there's so much capital around. We just talked about it. I remember you were always being chased, the two of you, by investors, and you could have always raised more capital and raised it very, sort of sexy headline prices, and everyone would have maybe felt better, maybe not. But it's just not something you guys were ever interested in which today it would be quite rare. People were throwing money at you, and it was not a thing for you guys. It was never, it wasn't so exciting for you to like get that headline price. Dare I say it, have the ego stroke. Like, maybe for the benefit of the group, talk a little bit about how you thought about the investor side of things, and how you thought about fundraising and how important that was.
I think we became pretty strategic pretty early on sort of, I mean, I had my experience from being sort of a bit squeezed in my first venture, and at the point where we started to become sort of close to profitable, but we still saw benefit of more growth capital, and it was sort of very easy to understand what that capital would do to the business. Then we started to look at, I mean, we did our rounds, we went around, we did some splashes in the press, but only at the time when it actually meant something. I mean, we would never join something like this. We were never part of this sort of being on the stage. We only did that when we really needed it, and then we were just out of it. We just left that. And then we met, you and a few others that we felt are, I mean, like, we understood that there was both some real value from the network and sort of yours and some of the other guys on the board's backgrounds, which truly proved to be the right thing. And then there was a lot of, other capital that did not have that. And so I think, I mean, we had the benefit of being able to cherry pick, and then very quickly, we became profitable, which meant that we didn't have to go after capital. I mean, we did an acquisition back in the days where we sort of had to accept some capital because that was part of them getting big enough in the cap table.
Which you never used, by the way. You never used the capital.
No, exactly. So that was money that was just we never touched that. But no, so I think we were lucky that we didn't have to do it. And I think, but also something that I truly believe, and I talk to like people I work with is, and to the companies that it's don't spend too much time on it, and don't spend too much time running around trying to win prizes and stuff. Focus on what you do. But obviously there's a balance here again. Sometimes it's good to be seen. So yeah.
No, but it's different advice. It's not necessarily the way things are done, and so I thought it would be helpful for the group to hear it. I have a really nice question from Anne around, when a company grows, and it's a longish question, so I'll read it if that's okay. When a company grows and changes tremendously, as was the case for Avito, where do you set a limit between loyalty and skills? So founding team members may be loyal but unable to progress, and I think we've talked about the founding side of it, but there was a question related to this also as to how you grew people, how you entered them beyond the transparency, beyond the culture. How did you give back in a more specific way to end up where you ended up?
So at some point, when I was still really sort of part of the recruitment, then it was easy. Then it was a lot of loyalty, and there was a lot of loyalty to me, and the fact that me and Philip, the fact that we were also loyal to them. But as this person asked, when a company grows, that becomes much more difficult. But again, we invested a tremendous amount of time to find the right people to be both sort of the local leaders of teams, but also in HR and creating this nice working environment where people felt that they were really seen. And I think leadership is also time. It's like being a parent. You need to invest time. It's not just quality, it's time. So I was running around a lot, meeting people, like people I didn't know, but I just, when the company got to that point, just showing your face and, bringing a group together, talking a bit about what's happening to give them sort of a sense. And we had a lot of these also, of course, bigger group meetings. But then obviously there's a point, we were, I think when we left, almost 2,000 employees. You're at the point where, it's more of like, how much do I get paid? What's my option package look like if you're a senior individual? But also the fact that this was, we had a super nice office. We were founders that were present. There's a lot of talent. Talent wants to work with talent. So I haven't really been part of any moment in the company where a lot of people left. I think I've been part of when people have left for the right reasons, and then it's both the company and the person who wants to separate. But and it might be different now, but I'm not sure. I still have contact with the company, but we haven't discussed that much. I know they're bringing on new talent from all over the world. But it's definitely there's definitely a point where these things happen. And I think in some of the companies where we're owners that are a bit bigger, then you see like Klarna, you have had, big shifts in people. And I think it's a deliberate decision by the founders or the founder who runs the company and maybe a management decision. But in our case, we never got to that point. We did it along the way. And it worked really well.
And I should mention that Avito was always a consistently rated top place to work in Russia, which is no mean feat. And I think the other thing that's really interesting for people to realize is that you and Philip really created the succession planning, which people don't talk about. But it's not something that a single board that I'm involved in is talking about succession planning, because you just don't have that conversation. But you were very proactive. And to actually think about succession planning, you have to really think about empowerment and the next level of leadership and making sure the board and the owners really got to know, right? The next level of management. So you were very sophisticated, even though I think you were doing it quite instinctively. There's a good question that Ryan asked right at the beginning of our session which ties into one of my questions too, which is really around the question here is specifically how do you balance purpose versus profits, which is something we all talk a lot about because of mission, the people's mission, and I think giving back, and it's much more central than it was a decade ago. And I know that's not the core of what you were doing, but what I wanted to say on this topic is that there was always a great feeling of kindness within Avito. I think it's worth sharing the story on the Crimea War, where the Russian government invaded Ukraine, and we had an entire team there, and how you took care of people. And maybe that's not pure purpose, but I think it is. It's around treating people with kindness, even though you're an incredible competitive founder couple and in competitive companies. So how did you straddle the humanity versus always being focused on winning?
I think again, so we had, one of those special occasions, which what we call the X factor of doing business in Russia is when sort of, the country invades another country, and suddenly, everything in that part of the country gets, there's nothing working anymore. So you have to do, you have to move out because they cannot use software from the US anymore. It's just mayhem. And we, again, to the point that I said before, we made promises to people, and we said, let's make sure that all these things that we have said transcends into this sort of very peculiar and sort of weird thing. So we gave an opportunity to everyone to move with their families into Russia, and amazingly enough, a large part of this 200 and something people crew decided to move with us outside of Crimea, and we set up a new office in St. Petersburg. And again, these things become stories, and there's a lot of stories around sort of how we did things in Russia, and sort of in the corporate or internet world of Russia. I think there's still a lot of good stories that also pushed other companies to do better, because people care about these things. And in Russia, the company is much closer to family than it is in other parts of the world where I've worked. So, which is also becomes a bit weird sometimes when you have to separate, because then it's like you're separating from the family, which is weird. But in many ways, it's super good.
That's true. And I think we have 2 minutes left. And so in the time left, you're in a a great place now. You have your own investment business with Philip, your co-founder at Avito, and some other folks from Avito that you remain incredibly close to. You're involved in philanthropic activities, spending quality time and taking risk on mountain climbing and other things. What advice would you give founders who might be lucky enough to sort of get to the point that you are in life in terms of how to think about where you want to end up and what the next stage could look like? I know it's a very personal journey, but any advice, any thoughts?
We got advice from many people who had done, like Niklas Sennström. We met him. He gave us, from Skype. He gave us the advice to take it easy and think about things and think over investments and where to give and where to invest, and obviously it's like starting a business. There's a lot of good advice, and what I've learned is that these entrepreneurs that ask for advice, they still don't listen to advice, which I think it's part of the journey. Yeah. And so we did everything at once, and now we have a lot of things to deal with, again, because we think that it's a big responsibility to invest. It's not just something that you do and then you just leave it. You have to be willing to follow up and help when needed, and that's stealing some time from skiing and other fun stuff. But we still have plenty of time to have fun.
And we're happy we have you in the ecosystem with us. Thank you, Jonas. That was great. Thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully there was some different and valuable insights there for the group.